Alberta's forests have a rich natural and cultural heritage. For over 12,000 years of human history, they have provided the basic survival needs of those who traveled, explored, and pioneered the rugged landscapes of Western Canada. Within this wilderness, these diverse forests continue to be a place of natural world treasure, economic riches, and a source of spiritual energy for those who realize their beauty and bounty within each changing season. Perhaps nothing stirs our imagination and passions more than the use of our forests, the lifeblood of human civilization. The evolution of Alberta's forests began 12,000 years ago, as the vast glacial ice sheets that covered the landscape began to melt and recede. Wind carried new plant species to this freshly scoured land, which rapidly developed into a rich and diverse ecosystem. The forests, as we know them today, were shaped about 5,000 years ago through centuries of erosion, wind, fire, climate change, and the introduction of new plant and animal species. The Rocky Mountains also played a vital role in the evolution of Alberta's forests. They form a natural western barrier to the boreal forest, channeling warm winds into Chinooks and providing spring runoff for the major rivers that flow through Western Canada. Historically, wildfires roared through these mountain slopes, altering thousands of square kilometers of forest cover and burning everything in their path. As a result, much of the forest along the eastern slopes of the Rockies is comprised of even-aged stands. Wildlife such as buffalo and elk, or wapiti as the natives called them, roamed these valleys and foothills, feeding on the fresh plant growth that followed the fires. The first people of the forest were Aboriginal hunters and gatherers, living on and with the land. There is strong evidence that they manipulated their environment through the use of fire, to clear forested areas for ease of travel, and to create lush new grass that attracted the animals on which they lived. Deliberate burning by the natives was the first example in Canada of man's use of fire as a major tool to influence nature.
Well, the way our elders look at they call it Mother Earth. You know, the way they look at everything, we're brothers and sisters for everything that's there. You know, God created all of us equally at one time, but He gave mankind, you know, the ability to manage that. And I guess the protection that we have to show is how do we protect our you know, our relatives. They call everything our relatives. Everything they look at it has a spirit, and I think that's one of the things. They depend on everything depends on something else.
When Europeans first came to Canada, they encountered almost limitless forests that covered most of the northern and western part of the continent. They were amazed by the dimensions of the forest, and also they discovered that people had been living in these forests for 500 generations. They discovered too that Aboriginal peoples had been managing those forests, and in some places even burning them to make them more productive in terms of the animals that existed there that they depended on and hunted.
The first Europeans arriving in Western Canada soon realized the forests were an immense storehouse of riches, especially in the form of animals for fur. Explorers and traders such as David Thompson, who worked for both the Hudson's Bay and Northwest companies, traveled through the West in search of new trading areas, while at the same time mapping the great rivers that would become the highways to this new world.
The fur trade was our first economy, and it was a forest economy, and rivers proved to be avenues to the heart of the western forests. And in discovering this landscape and defining it, subsequent industries such as logging were able to be developed in the West. And most interestingly, the people who came found that they loved this place, stayed and were transformed by it, and became locals by choice.
Traders and explorers were soon followed by missionaries and settlers, who initially clustered around the trading posts and missions. Ranchers would later bring cattle to the open range, replacing the great herds of buffalo that once grazed the prairie grasslands. Wood was an essential commodity for these settlers of the New West, especially as logs for building and as a fuel source. Therefore, much of the early immigration into Alberta via the fur trade was to the heavily wooded boreal forest of the north along the Peace, Athabasca, and Slave Rivers. Carving an existence from this vast wilderness was a huge challenge. All of the wood was felled by axe or saw. When lumber was produced, it was sawn by hand with a whipsaw on a frame or in a pit. They could produce about 300 board feet per day. By comparison, the large modern sawmills can produce about 1 million board feet a day. Following Canada's Confederation in 1867 and the continued settlement of the West, the history of Alberta's forests began to change. Oblate fathers at Lac La Biche Mission built Alberta's first water-powered sawmill in October 1871. The lumber was used initially to construct a new cathedral and mission buildings. Just 12 years later, in 1883, the Canadian Pacific Railway would reach as far west as Calgary, creating a great demand for timber in the southern part of the territory. This instant market needed railroad ties and timber for trestles. Although it was not a get-rich-quick enterprise, supplying ties for the railroad provided an important cash flow for some settlers. Coal was also needed to supply the steam engines of the expanding railway system. As a result, the mining industry became one of the major users of timber in the form of mine props. This mine shaft at Nordegg represents just one of the numerous mines that played a vital role in Alberta's history.
Development of Canada and the development of America could not have taken place as it has without utilization of the forest resources. It's fundamentally important. And so the capacity for these two countries to develop as rapidly as they have has been fundamentally dependent upon exploiting the wood that's in their forests.
With the influx of settlers, large steam-powered sawmills were established around the fast-growing major centers. 4 prominent sawmills were the Northwestern Coal and Navigation Company at Lethbridge, the Eau Claire and Bow River Lumber Company in Calgary, the Alberta Lumber Company, later known as Great West in Red Deer, and the John Walter Mill in Edmonton. All these mills were built between 1883 and 1894. To easily transport logs, nearly all early sawmills were built along rivers and lakes. Moving heavy logs to the mills was restricted to using waterways, railroads, and over short distances, sleighs pulled by horses or oxen. Logs were piled along riverbanks during the winter, then, during the heavy spring runoff, rolled into the water to be floated to the riverside mills. Some streams were dammed to back up water that was used to flush the logs down to the rivers when the dam gates were opened. Though using the rivers to move logs had many advantages, it also had some major disadvantages. In 1915, huge floods on both the Red Deer and North Saskatchewan rivers wiped out both the Great West and Walter mills. However, settlers in Saskatchewan did have a nice supply of free logs and lumber that year. Most of Alberta's very early mills are now gone, and the names gone with them. One notable exception is the operation started by J.W. Miller. Miller owned a blacksmith shop in Saskatchewan, and as part of his enterprise, ended up with a large number of horses, which he put to work in the logging business. In 1922, he bought the Capitol Sawmill in Whitecourt. His legacy lives on through Miller Western, the largest family-owned Alberta forest company. During the late 1870s, steamboats began to ply the great northern waterways. These river boats and their steam boilers required huge amounts of cordwood, creating opportunities for enterprising locals to cut and store wood for sale along the riverbanks to passing steamers. Though the larger early mills were located near the major centers of the day, smaller portable mills quickly made their way across the more distant parts of the territory. These local mills were important suppliers to their own regions, and over the years, the small sawmill business would turn into a major cottage industry. This practice is still common today, with private woodlot owners and small sawmills stepping in to fill niche markets. Dan Reeser, whose family has ranched in the Cypress Hills for over 100 years, operates one such mill with his brother.
Here in the Cypress Hills, as well as a ranching operation, I also operate a sawmill, manage the woodlot on the ranch here to get some benefit from the forest, as well as managing it for wildlife and surrounded by provincial park. So I also keep in mind that others are very much aware of what I'm doing here.
The Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park is a major conservation and recreation area for southern Alberta and Saskatchewan. Conservation of resources and environmental issues were not primary concerns of early loggers and settlers. This was not due to a lack of awareness, but rather to the perception that the resources were vast, perhaps even unending. However, an issue that did concern everyone was wildfire. Politicians as far back as the early 1800s recognized the potential of Canada's western forests and the threat of wildfire to this resource. Governments have the major responsibility for management of Alberta's forests, as they are mostly located on Crown lands or lands in public ownership. In 1899, the Dominion Forestry Branch was created to protect and manage the forest on the Dominion lands of the Northwest Territories, of which Alberta was a part. Certain timberlands were reserved from settlement to sustain the forest for watersheds and availability of lumber. This early vision by the government established the Rocky Mountains Forest Reserve. Additional land for national parks was also set aside at this time. Banff National Park, Canada's first national park, had already been designated in 1885. Other national parks today include Jasper, Wood Buffalo, Elk Island, and Waterton. The province has also established numerous parks and protected wilderness areas such as the Wilmore Wilderness, Kakwa, and parts of the Bighorn Country. In 1905, Alberta became a province of Canada. Despite insistence by the people of the West that their new province have equal rights with all other provinces of the Dominion, the federal government kept control of and the revenue from public lands. In 1911, the Dominion Forestry Branch set up dedicated forest fire prevention, detection, and control programs along the eastern slopes of the Rockies and other forest reserves. Though fire control on the eastern slopes improved significantly, fire protection in the northern part of the province remained limited. The potential for massive wildfires was made clear in 1919, when a fire consumed an estimated 7 million acres in northern Alberta and Saskatchewan, wiping out Lac La Biche and 2 other communities. With threat of fires this size, it was decided that many more rangers were needed to ensure programs were properly implemented. R.H. Campbell, Director of Forestry for the Government of Canada, presented a list of what the qualifications of a forest ranger should be.
The success of forest administration rests to a very large degree on the intelligence, the faithfulness and the practicability of the forest ranging staff. The work of a forest ranger is arduous and requires a man of energy and strong physique. The qualifications for appointment as a forest ranger should be as follows. He should be between the ages of 25 and 40. He should be sober, industrious, and physically fit. He should be able to read and write and have sufficient knowledge of arithmetic to transact the ordinary business of the reserve, such as calculating the dues on permits. he should be able to handle horses and to ride.
Over the years, the Canadian Dominion Forest Rangers explored, mapped, and established the forest reserves, understanding the need to battle fire to safeguard watersheds and protect the resource for the future. Foresters, professionally trained graduates of forestry schools, were generally placed in charge of the forest reserves and administrative units.
Dominion Forest Service played a central role in establishing the value of forests in the West. And they define landscapes that should be protected for watershed and also help declare which landscapes and forestry areas should be developed for industry. And for example, Jasper National Park started out as Jasper Forest Park and was originally under control of the Dominion Forestry, and only later was transferred through federal jurisdiction into the National Park Service.
Over the next 20 years, foresters and rangers would see many changes. Roads were built into once remote areas, making way for automobiles and new people. Men were called away to fight in the First World War, and airplanes, developed during that war, would later be used in firefighting. The first aircraft were engaged in fire detection and trial forest surveys in the 1920s. An early report from Alberta's forest supervisor noted that one fire was observed daily by using aircraft. Without the aircraft, a similar trip would have taken a week by saddle and pack horse. Aircraft remain one of the most important tools in firefighting, with planes and helicopters designed specifically for this purpose. Albertans celebrated a major event in 1930 when the Government of Canada granted the province control of its public lands and natural resources, including timber, oil, and gas. Through this transfer of resources, the Alberta Forest Service was created, and most of the people employed by the federal government were shifted to the new service. Unfortunately, the transfer happened just as the Great Depression began. Though the Forest Service did set up unemployment relief camps, putting hundreds of unemployed men to work in the forest, it struggled through those years to make ends meet. As the dust of the Depression began to settle, war hit. As Alberta's first Director of Forestry, Ted Blefkin plaintively noted in his report of 1946-47.
During the Depression years, we were definitely informed that no money could be made available, and during the war years, the necessary labor could not be secured.
One form of labor that was available during World War II were German prisoners of war, transported to remote areas of Western Canada. Some of these highly skilled prisoners volunteered to work in lumber camps and planer mills in Alberta. Prisoner Wilhelm Kess sketched the activities at the Fawcett Lake lumber camp.
For 2.5 years, Fawcett Lake became our world. We were involved in all phases of the lumberjack trade. The rules were simple: 10 hours of work a day, 6 days a week, 50 cents credit in the store for each day worked, and of course room, board, and clothing.
Some POWs chose to return to Alberta after the war to build new lives at a place that they became quite fond of. Returning Canadian veterans and other immigrants would also make their way to Alberta after World War II, and many would make their livings in the forest industry. The eastern slopes had an especially high concentration of smaller mills, with the area around Rocky Mountain House alone having over 40 mills. A number of those post-war family businesses grew to be major enterprises, and they remain an important part of Alberta's heritage. In 1947, the discovery of oil at Leduc No. 1 would forever change the Alberta landscape. Oil revenues would provide much-needed funds to the provincial government, allowing departments such as forestry to grow. The oil and gas industry would also have a major impact on the forest through the development of roads, lease sites, and seismic lines. 1947 was also a year of change for the Alberta Forest Service, with the retirement of Ted Blefkin and the appointment of Eric S. Hustis. Hustis was also a man of vision. Under his leadership, the Green Area was established in 1949, that identified the forested areas on which to focus management and protection. The implementation of the green area prevented the indiscriminate sale and development of forest lands. Eustis also started a forest inventory and was instrumental in the development of agreements that would allow for perpetual sustainable yield, today known as Forest Management Agreements, or FMAs. Two men in particular would help Eustis see his vision through: Des Crossley and Reg Loomis. Des Crossley, a former research scientist with the Canadian Forest Service and chief forester for Northwest Pulp and Power, would revolutionize the way companies and governments work together in the industry through his careful analysis, development, and implementation of the FMA system. His pioneering work in reforestation was to become a model for all of Canada. Reg Loomis, a forester with the Alberta Forest Service, approached his task of completing a forest inventory with equal vigor. It was Loomis who, along with Arden Ritz, executive director of the Alberta Forest Products Association, that established the quota system in 1966, which granted secure tenure to the smaller companies. This allowed them to operate and implement improved forest management alongside the forest management areas. Since 1966, all forest stands harvested by the forest industry have been reforested to strictly regulated standards. The next 50 years would prove to be an era of phenomenal growth and change. The forestry trunk road would be built along the edge of the Rockies to allow easier access to the eastern slopes for watershed protection and firefighting. Lookout towers were built along the mountains and into the north. Some of the mountain locations were difficult to reach, and wood for construction had to be hauled by horse. Firefighting training was implemented, and dedicated firefighting teams would become a major component of the Alberta Forest Service firefighting program. Major efforts were made to improve forest fire detection with additional fire lookout towers, lightning detection systems, and expanding aerial patrol. This was linked to major improvements to the firefighting systems, focusing on rapid initial attacks with water bombers and RAP attack crews, utilizing helicopters which were often pre-deployed in high-hazard areas to reduce travel time. The initial attack crews were backed up with 20-man standby crews of trained firefighters who would be sent to larger fires. Alberta's firefighters have the reputation as being the best in the world. On a federal level, the Dominion Forestry branch would become the Canadian Forest Service, which continues to play an important role in research and development. Industry itself would see major changes in the way in which it does business and carries out its operations. Machinery and technology would rapidly take over from the horse and hand laborer, and large global companies would become a part of the Alberta forest industry. It would also prove to be a very challenging time. As the population base of the province increased, so changed the values for and demands on the forest. The public began to take more interest in forest practices, with various groups each presenting strong and passionate opinions on how the forest should be viewed and managed.
With our egocentric idea of mankind, why we tend to think if it's not gone into lumber or it's not gone into something for me, it's wasted. And it isn't wasted. There's nothing on earth wasted if it's left, because there's something out there that's going to use it, it's going to get a benefit from it. And we need to see nature, I think, in a balanced way, that we can see it as a whole thing, that all of our existence isn't really separate from nature.
Community involvement across Canada is an integral part of today's industry practices, with companies actively seeking input from the public and other forest stakeholders. And though passions still run high, interest groups and industry are finding new ways of working through old issues. Cooperative efforts, such as the restoration of Hardesty Creek, which runs through the town of Hinton, is one such example.
An urban watershed project entails working with multiple partnerships together for the benefit of the watershed, and that's exactly what we've done here. This particular project, the Hardisty Creek Restoration Project, was initiated in 2001 and brought forward to the Foothills Model Forest. Perhaps more importantly is to bring about education for the community, to look at how multiple partnerships can actually benefit community. And I think that is one of the key aspects of what we're looking at here.
The Foothills Model Forest is one of 11 model forests across Canada that involves community stakeholders to address forest management issues. Conservation of water and enhancement of watersheds are topics of interest today. These same interests were at the heart of the formation of both the federal and provincial forest services.
I think the context that this should all be put into is that the water on the prairies is not only an important resource, but it's one that's been disappearing. And so there's been a gradual reduction in surface waters everywhere. And so this gradual reduction has really brought people to think more seriously about going back to that original linkage between the forests and the water.
Not only are the watersheds of the eastern slopes vital, but equally important are the large water reserves and water filtering fens and muskegs of the boreal forests in the northern part of the province. The boreal forest is home to key breeding, staging, and molting areas used by tens of millions of birds, in addition to important habitat to wolves, moose, and other creatures that share this eco-rich landscape. Canada's vast green forest belt contains more than 1/4 of the world's boreal forests, with 30% comprised of wetlands and water. The 1950s would see the beginning of a large expansion in Alberta's forest industry. The first pulp mill was built at Hinton in 1955, following the establishment of the province's first forest management agreement with the Northwest Pulp and Power Company in 1954. The FMA included a complete reforestation program, carefully planned forest inventory, and harvest management systems for sustainable yield. The early pioneers of the forest trade would probably be surprised and awed at the way the industry has evolved. It has gone from one of the most labor-intensive and dangerous activities to a high-tech, highly mechanized industry that integrates a broad suite of values into its planning and operations.
In terms of developing the detailed forest management plan, we model the harvesting and regeneration over about a 200-year period. And out of that, what we do is we refine it to what we call about a 20-year timber harvest sequence. In a general sense, that says where within our management area we're going to be harvesting for the next 20 years. That information is then passed off to our operational planners who do the more detailed planning in terms of how we're going to road the area, the actual cut block boundaries, what the design is going to look like.
By its very nature, the forest industry must look to the future. It is the ever-revolving cycle of the forest that allows both the industry and the ecosystem to continue to exist. A major component of this cycle is reforestation and silviculture. Reforestation, based on long-term planning, begins as soon as the trees are harvested. Cones are collected and then sent to a nursery where the seeds are extracted, stored, and then grown when needed. Every year, 75 million coniferous seedlings are planted, and deciduous trees are helped in their natural cycle to grow into new forests. Alberta regulations require that logged areas be replanted with trees grown from seeds from that exact location. Perhaps it cannot be stated enough how much planning now goes into the forest industry, and the level of research, science, public input, and advanced technology included in those plans. Satellite imagery, advanced software programs, and other state-of-the-art equipment are just some of the tools used by modern forest planners.
Forestry is very much a part of modern society. Some people, they think of forestry, they try and characterize it as a sunset industry. but that's far from the truth. Very much a high-tech industry in terms of the tools that we now use in not only managing the forest, but in how we process the timber into the different products.
When we look at the history of the forest industry, it is easy to see that it has always been driven by the needs of the consumer. Stop for a moment and look around to see just how connected you still are to the forest. Do you read the newspaper, magazines, or books? Do you use toilet tissue and napkins? And what about your house and the furniture in it? How much paper do you put through your computer printer and fax machine each year? It is our consumptive habits that determine what the forest industry produces from our most treasured natural resource. Though the basic premise of sawmills has not changed for 100 years, the advances in technology and the speed and efficiency with which we are able to produce dimensional lumber today is phenomenal. Most mills are now highly computerized, and many are fitted with lasers that scan the logs to determine how the log will be cut to maximize yield. In addition to standard dimensional construction lumber, secondary wood products are also produced, such as tongue and groove lumber, balusters for railings, and roof trusses. Sawmill residues are now used in the creation of many other products, such as pulp and fiberboard. Some companies in Alberta are also generating electric power from such leftover wood. Communities such as Grand Prairie and Drayton Valley benefit from these forward-thinking conservation initiatives. An important part of Alberta's forest history is the introduction of engineered wood products. These include plywood, oriented strand board, medium-density fiberboard, laminated veneer lumber, and glulam, which were all created to meet specific applications. One of the best-known engineered wood products, and the one which has been around the longest, is plywood. Created by gluing sheets of wood veneer cross-grained to each other, plywood has long been a staple in the construction industry. Oriented strand board, or OSB, is also a popular building material. The OSB process is a highly efficient use of the tree, which combines wood strands with resins. This mixture is bonded together under heat and pressure to create a strong structural panel. Alberta companies are the leading producers of OSB in North America. Medium-density fiberboard is a product which can be found in most homes today. MDF is created by grinding wood chips or fine wood wastes into a cellulose fiber that is then mixed with resin. Heat and pressure are then used to press the mix into a smooth board. A very versatile product, MDF is ideal for moldings or furniture building, as it can be laminated, cut, molded, and painted to suit a variety of applications. Historically, wood has been a favorite material for architects and builders, not only for its ease of use and durability, but also for its versatility, strength, and beauty. In the past, big beams used in construction projects were supplied by large timbers. As use of these big timbers became less feasible, more inventive products were developed. Two such products are laminated veneer lumber and glulam. Laminated veneer lumber, which is produced by gluing a predetermined number of veneer sheets together to create an engineered beam, is now used for headers and footers in residential and commercial construction. The beams created through the glulam process are designed with both function and beauty in mind. Manufactured through the layering of finger-jointed lumber, glulam beams made in Alberta can now be found in some of the most beautiful buildings in the world. Although wood is the most visible component of engineered products, the resins which hold the wood together are equally important. Chemical companies that create such resins work hand in hand with the forest industry in testing and developing products to meet a wide application of engineering needs. Part of the future of forestry rests not only with advances in technology and science, but also in the development of young people interested in pursuing a career in the industry.
Forestry industry in Alberta offers all sorts of opportunities for young people from all different backgrounds, including the technical trades and engineering and as well as administration. It offers the opportunity to develop as young people in careers as well as young people in the community.
For young people in forestry, I think the sky is the limit. From my point of view, there's no better industry that combines salary, challenge, and opportunity than the forest industry these days. There's so much technology, there's so much consciousness and awareness of the environment.
Pulp was one of the first value-added forest industries in Alberta. Today, a number of companies are involved in the production of pulp, utilizing a variety of techniques. One technique used in the province from the beginning is the craft process, which uses chemicals and heat to extract the cellulose fiber of the tree from which pulp is made. Another technique used is the chemithermal mechanical process, also known as high yield. This process uses a combination of heat, mechanical action, and mild chemicals to separate the cellulose fibers. Though a number of companies produce pulp in Alberta, only one company continues the process of turning pulp into paper. The Alberta Newsprint Company's massive paper machine produces newsprint at an average rate of 747 metric tons per day, or 269,000 tons per year. Newsprint from the company is sent across North America to be used by such papers as the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the Edmonton Journal. Ongoing planning, research, and development are vital components to the forest industry. Production facilities are constantly monitoring their operations to make them more efficient and to ensure environmental standards are being met. Companies often partner with the Alberta Research Council, located in Edmonton, in the development and refinement of products. Perhaps the most visible change in the industry in the last 100 years is in how the forest is harvested. The evolution has gone from hand labor to highly mechanized and computerized machinery that is efficient and safe. Spin-off industries that provide goods and services have always played an important role. While ongoing forest planning is one piece of the puzzle, continued research and development into new products, techniques, and species also has a long-term impact on the forest. Research into hybrid species, especially for aspen, has been ongoing for many years. Although aspen has always had many aesthetic values, including its colorful autumn season, in the past it was often considered of low value by both industry and agriculture. However, it is now a key player in Alberta's northern forest industry. Ironically, once considered an impediment to farming, aspen may have an interesting future as an alternative agricultural crop.
We've been working in this area for about 10 years now to develop trees that could be used in an agricultural setting. We'd be focused on marginal agricultural lands that are not prime agricultural areas and would give an alternative crop to local farmers. We're working with species such as the hybrid poplar you see in the background that have been used on the prairies for shelter belt purposes, but increasingly in the last 10-20 years for fiber as well for the forest industry. There are certainly opportunities to sequester carbon on agricultural lands by planting hybrid poplar. We're working with the Canadian Forest Service through the Forest 2020 program to, this year we're putting out about 85 hectares, about 120,000 trees as part of the demonstration project. And the intent is, and this is right across the country, is to put out these demonstration areas to demonstrate the potential to sequester carbon on marginal agricultural lands.
It's not just a question of converting a farm into a forest. You can have a few acres in the back 40 or whatever, a few acres of woodlot. And this now has value. As a mill or a forest industry, a forest company, you might want to have a secure supply of fiber close to the mill so you can do an intensive plantation here. as a government, you might want to be regulating where we're going to do forestry, and so therefore where we can do something intensive, and what the trade-off is in terms of protection elsewhere, and conservation and maintenance of the habitat value for those other values that are in the forest.
So there's potential with the exploration of aspens and aspen hybrids. They can provide habitat, they can provide an aesthetic resource, they can provide fiber for the future, they can provide carbon sinks. All these things are there, and they're there as a potential, and that's what our program is about, is exploring that potential.
Many forest practitioners, with support of the Canadian Forest Service, are involved in the daily work of dealing with diseases, pests, and other threats to forest stands. The mountain pine beetle, which has made its way from British Columbia into Alberta, is a major threat to the forest. A pervasive pest, the mountain pine beetle has destroyed huge tracts of timber in other parts of North America.
This is a large lodgepole pine at the boundary of Banff National Park, and it's been attacked from beetles that exist from within the park that are at endemic levels. They're a natural population that periodically spreads towards the park boundary. And you can see that it's attacked through these pitch tubes here and built galleries that go up along the bark here. And as time goes on over the course of the fall here, these galleries, the beetle will lay eggs in them, and there'll be side galleries that come off. And over the next few months, this tree will die. And this is in a control area near the park boundary where we control all of our beetles, this tree will be removed. But if it was in a natural population further within the park, it would then, the beetles' eggs would hatch next spring, and you would have another flight out of the tree.
Efforts to manage threats such as the mountain pine beetle are ongoing. However, insects, disease, and fire are natural disturbances that have been, and always will be, a significant part of the forest life cycle. Forest companies continue to have a long-term vested interest in the province of Alberta. With this investment comes a commitment to the future, not only in the forest, but also in the community. The concept of stewardship has gone beyond the sustainability of the forest to a vision that includes sustaining a healthy community for future generations. Over the next 100 years, stewardship of Alberta's forested landscape and the protection of wildlife, water, and other environmental values will remain a priority for forest practitioners and all Albertans. The late Lieutenant Governor Lois Hole noted during one of her last public appearances, we as a society and as individuals must take responsibility for the stewardship of our forests.
Our forests are an incredible reservoir of natural resources, a place where millions of Canadians and Americans reconnect with the natural world every year, and a sanctuary for thousands of plant and animal species. As such, our forests are perhaps the most important natural legacy we have. Foresters promote the sustainable development of our precious forests and encourage us to learn more about the social, economic, cultural, and environmental importance of our nation's forests. If we hope to maintain a democratic society with an excellent standard of living, and especially if we hope to see freedom and prosperity spread to the world's poorest nations, then we must adjust our thinking towards our natural resources. They are not, as it once must have seemed, without limit. As our civilization develops and our cities expand ever outward, encroaching deeper and deeper into territories once wild, each of us must take a hard look at our impact on the environment. Right now, I think most people see conservation as a nice idea, but I'm not sure that they've made the leap to making conservation a part of their daily lives.
The West is no longer as wild as we think it is. It's no longer as wild as we tell others it is. And one of the reasons for that is there are more of us living in our western forests. And as we live in denser situations in these forests, we have to change our habits. And we've learned now that in living in these forests demands that we practice certain measures of conservation that weren't obvious to us in the past. Our whole relationship to Canadian forests is changing.
Perhaps this change is really just a return to a set of values that the forest itself dictates.
The forest is something like it's like the heartbeat. You know, it's what gives you life. And in the things that you see, the life that you see, you know, each one of them has a duty it was created for.
Summer songbirds brought the music, owl and eagle sighted prey. Every bough provided shelter on the stormiest of days. I remember playful autumns in the river down below, and the seed I've sown will follow after me. They'll live adventures not unlike the ones I've lived as a tree. All I've heard and all I've seen, ever hear, evergreen. When I'm taken down for lumber, will they read within my range and know that I remember my adventure as a tree? All I've heard and all I've seen, ever hear, evergreen. When I'm taken down for lumber, will they read within my range and know that I remember my adventures?
Accommodations provided by Sutton Place Hotel, Edmonton's premier business address in the heart of the city.